Good evening, everybody. This is What Does the Bible Say? My name is Caleb Robertson. This is a live religious broadcast that typically, almost always, is about local evangelism. We're trying to get people out of sectarianism. I'm not Baptist or Roman Papist or anything like that. I'm not Presbyterian or Episcopalian. I am just a Christian. I'm not in a denomination. You read your Bible, there's one church. I'm just in the one church. And if there's only, like someone says, well, what's the name? Well, if there's only one of its kind, it doesn't really need a name, does it? It's just the church of the Bible. It's the body of Christ. I'm in it. I don't have any creeds or manuals or anything like that. I read books just like anybody else does, but I only pledge my allegiance to the Bible. This is what does the Bible say will look like on your smartphone. You can see it anywhere where the device has access to YouTube. You just put in YouTube Johnny Robertson, and this is what it will come up looking like. Phone number is 276-806-3641. If you email me, we'll get you on the Informer list, which is a page-and-a-half Bible article that comes out every Sunday morning. I've been doing a series on must we know Greek to study the Bible. I'm all for studying Greek, and I think you ought to have Kittle's New Testament dictionary set in your home. But if we're going to say that a person has to know Greek in order to find and discover God's will, I'm not getting with that at all. And then we're going to jump right in tonight where I say typically it's about local evangelism, and that's our focus, and that's what I think your focus ought to be. But I am a member of the body of Christ at large, and I interact with different people, and I see the things that go on, and I hear about them, and I've got thoughts and opinions just like anybody else does, but I just tend to get in trouble with mine. LaGard Smith told me that I owe Terry Gardner an apology, and I'm going to give him one. So Terry, the way that Terry Gardner found himself being on What Does the Bible Say is that he went to I'm not joking, okay? I'm not joking. I'm going to apologize to him. And so the way that he found himself on the broadcast is that he went to Terrell, Texas, Southwestern Christian College, and he was there to talk about history, okay? Terry Gardner is a big history dude. And so he goes in and he told me, he said, I don't know anybody who's there. When I made note in the video that's on YouTube, I said, there he is sitting next to Orpheus Hayward. And he just told me, he said, I don't even know who Orpheus Hayward is. And I put up, when I did the video, I put up Alan Heyer's book Against Rubel Shelley. And Alan Heyers wrote this book against Rubel Shelley called How Do You Spell Fellowship? Big F, little f. And the idea in the Alan Heyers book is that Alan, to Rubel, was denigrating the idea of unity and diversity, and sometimes unity and diversity is called fellowship without endorsement. Well, you know, that's what he's doing right here is fellowship without endorsement. And, you know, we're going to play a clip from Steve Wolfgang in a moment. Steve says it's a level of fellowship. But I want to say this, as I'm going to get to it in just a moment. If anything, I had a bigger problem with Freed Hardeman than I did Terry Gardner. Terry's down here, he's lecturing on history. He says, I don't know Orpheus, but this is my thing about Freed Hardeman. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys actually don't feel about Alan Heyers the way that you used to. And maybe that's where I'm mistaken. Like, I still think that you guys are like, oh, Alan Heyers, staunch conservative, tore up Rubel Shelley. Well, I don't really care for that idea of 1984 tearing up Rubel Shelley. I think that Rubel Shelley was making valid points in 1984, and I told Rubel to his face in the interview, I said, I think more people disagreed with your book who didn't even read it. And so I think a bunch of people said, well, if Alan Heyers was against it, it's good enough for me. And so that's how I feel. I don't understand Freed Hardeman just touting themselves as the most conservative entity, you know, somehow attached to the Church of Christ. But then this is what I'm saying. Orpheus would be doing exactly what people were upset with Rubel about 1984. He's looking at Christian church folk, and he's saying the piano is opinion, and he's wanting to call them brethren. And so it's like, well, if y'all just tore into Rubel, how come this isn't getting talked about? And the thing that I said in the video was, if Terry Gardner can go down there and be with Orpheus Hayward and not say anything about any of the ideas, can Terry Gardner bring Orpheus Hayward back to Freed Hardeman? And they would say no. But this is how I'm going to start the broadcast. Lagarde was in contact with me. He said, I think you owe Terry Gardner an apology, and I'm going to give him one. Now, this is also what I want to talk about. We all find ourselves right now in a very odd position. I keep quoting people's books, and, I get it. Someone says, well, I don't agree with that book anymore. But here's the problem. These men haven't said that they don't agree with their old books, like especially B.J. Clark. B.J. Clark wrote his discussion on guilt by association in the 1990 Collierville lectures called What a Fellowship. And so I quote the book, and that's Tom Childers. And tonight I'm going to have a quote from Tom Childers, and I'm just saying, look, y'all, I'm confused, okay? I don't think that anybody, and look, I'm going to say what I think, and I'm going to try to not get too worked up, because then someone's going to start calling me mean. But I'm going to say this. I don't think that anybody can doubt that I am inquisitive. I don't think that anybody can doubt that I am trying. Like, would you give me the credit to say, well, I think that Caleb Robertson wants to do the right thing. Okay, well, good night. As I'm trying to do the right thing, and I do all my searching, and I look to the scholars, well, what I find is that the scholars don't want to do what they wrote 30 years ago. Now, that quote there in the box, and I'm telling you, I look inside of everybody's box. This is Ed Harrell, The Bounds of Christian Unity. Look, I got it. I got my notes in it. He wrote a 16-piece series on fellowship, and it all revolved around Homer Haley. This is Jimmy Jividen's book, Koinonia. I have read that book. This is the 1992 Collierville Church of Christ Lectures, What a Fellowship, where B.J. Clark absolutely teaches guilt by association, and so does Billy Bland, and so does Wayne Jones' dad, and, everybody who was on that program was shouting guilt by association. Curtis Cates, I have read that book, and, when I say I'm looking at what everybody's saying, I Just Want to Be a Christian was a conversation about fellowship, where at the back of the book, Rubel says anybody that is born again is a child of God, and that's John 3:5. That's not wrong. And someone says, well, what does Rubel mean by that? What did it mean when John 3:5 first made it on the scene? Except you be born of water and the Spirit, you cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. Yeah, well, what about all these extra points? So I read that. And then Alan Hires, how do you spell fellowship? Big F, little f. And also, I didn't put it on the screen, Thomas Warren, the Bible only makes Christians only and the only Christians. So as I look around, I'm trying to figure it out. But I am confused. Because here I am, and I don't have a problem with saying this, like I've said to people as I interview them. I'm only 30 years old. I'm only 31 years old. So I'm out here, and I am an individual who, while I got a lot of education in preaching school, I look backwards, and I'm quite disappointed with a lot of the education that I got at preaching school. It was very one-sided. Like I told Steve Wolfgang, they didn't even tell us that you guys existed. Like if you had to rely on Memphis School of Preaching, you wouldn't think that there was any other intelligent people out there. And I said they didn't tell us about Bob Waldron, they didn't tell us about Bob Owen, they didn't tell us about Melvin Curry, just on and on and on. And you would have thought Rubel Shelley was the devil. And they didn't even tell us at Memphis that Rubel had such a backstory. I found that on my own, just reading. So we didn't have all this information. So, okay, here I am. I do my schooling. I come out. I'm introduced to a world of thought, and I'm trying to read everybody. And here's where I find myself. And I'm not trying to whine, but I am trying to have conversation with you. Y'all, I get beat up by both sides of the conversation, and I'm getting beat back and forth like a ping pong ball to the point where I say, I don't know what you guys want me to do. Okay? Here's where we start out. And I'm not upset at anybody, okay? But all this stuff is getting said out in the public, and I'm not going to just sit down and answer everybody individually. So this is a man named Spencer Strickland. He lives somewhere in Kentucky. And he says this: Yeah, that's good. Spencer says, I thought the interview was cordial, interesting, and insightful. I wish I had known where John Mark Hicks was coming from before I read his book, Searching for the Pattern. He seems to better explain in this interview his issue with blueprint hermeneutics than he does in the book, in my opinion. One thing I'm confused on, though, in these interviews is why it is okay to interview someone and be in the same room with them, but not say anything to them about why they are in error. But it is not okay to be on the same lectureship with someone and not say anything about their error. Is this inconsistent with what you and your dad have been saying about appearing on FHU's lectureship with those who also appeared on Pepperdine's lectureship? If not, please help me to understand. Now, in that interview with John Mark Hicks, that was about the most I had told someone I didn't agree with them. On the woman preacher stuff, I said to John Mark that he did interesting work. I said, but I don't agree with it. But I do want to come back to this idea. He said, what's the difference? And I will say this. Who doubts where I am? Is anybody having this idea that they feel like I'm compromising? And I'm not saying things like when we asked B.J. Clark about going to Bear Valley with different individuals, and their response, they don't want to be in fellowship with anybody. BJ says, I got on the plane, I went out there, I preached my sermon, I got back on the plane. And BJ is not the only person who talks like that. You would think that none of these people want anything to do with anybody. Now, I'm not in a conservative competition, and I got to tell you, it's really not that hard being in a conservative competition with a lot of y'all. Do you get what I'm saying? Y'all are not very conservative. You think that you are, but you're not. And so I'm not trying to be in a conservative competition. But when it comes to this moment, and he says it's inconsistent, maybe you don't even like my answer, but it is what it is. I would ask this question. Who has called more names than my dad and I? Wait a minute. If it was not for my dad in 2014, y'all wouldn't have had a clue about Jay Lockhart, Stafford North, and Royce Money. Now, I don't know if Drew remembers this, but if he does, and if he wants to say it out loud, Drew Leonard said to me that we're on the phone, and he said, I'm going to go ahead and just say that you and your dad got Stafford North off of Bear Valley. Now, I don't understand how I'm getting asked this question when you don't get public statements from BJ or Don Blackwell about anything. Why is it that Phil Sanders isn't on PTP anymore? You don't know why. I don't know why. I keep saying maybe he's sick. Maybe he just can't show up. Why is it that BJ Clark isn't going back to the Freed Hardeman lectures? You don't know why. Maybe he's just sick. Maybe he can't make it. See, y'all never get public information from anybody about anything. You always get closed room backroom meetings. Now, I don't really have a problem with this, but I do have to ask the question, who has done it more? And one thing that Jerry Moffitt said to my dad at Portland, Texas, was Jerry came up and he puts his arm on my dad and he says, Johnny, he said, you really cleansed the church. But the problem is they're never going to forgive you for it. And that's what Jerry Moffitt said. That's how he felt about it. Nobody really had a problem in the moment of 2014, but I'm just saying, the fellowship conversation wasn't what it should have been in 2014, and it's continued till now in various pockets here and there. And people all have to talk about it. But now I want to say this. Who doubts where I am? I do want us to think about this, and I just don't even know what to say about it if someone says tooting your own horn. Okay, wait a second. Who else is going to give you these interviews besides me? I love to get to do the interviews. I love getting to do all the research, and when I do the research, I come out with strong feeling for the people that I interview. I love it, okay? I love the research. I'm walking out, like I told the story the other night, both Lagarde and Mac Deaver said, how are you doing it? And I said, you guys are just a hobby. I said, I have all of my workload as a local evangelist. I just do y'all's stuff on the side. I love it. But I will say this, that I am introducing thought to a collection of people that otherwise was not going to come up. And so at some point, you are going to have to think this through. And I think that Spencer's trying to think it through. I don't think that Spencer's just throwing this empty accusation at me, but I do want to have this moment where I am unearthing this discussion about Rubel Shelley that absolutely deserves to be unearthed. And then taking that conversation from him over to Alan Hires, who gets to be this consistent picture of conservatism while Rubel Shelley is just dirt. And then Alan Hires defends the issue of women preachers on the lectureship. So, oh, wait, he didn't defend it. Yeah, he also said you didn't have to speak out against it either. Now, here's the thing. Either we're going to draw a line in the sand and say that women preachers is unbiblical and it's a problem, or we're just going to kind of play around with it. And I have to say, it looks like we're just playing around with it. So here's where I am again. What am I supposed to do? I don't agree with certain things. When I say out loud I don't agree with it, then it's like, well, I'm the devil because I'm hateful. And then I go in and I conduct these 2-3 hour long interviews, and it's like, well, wait a minute, now you're getting too close. Well, you're going to have to decide that one on your own. But this is what I also say about it. Why is it all on me? Good night. How is it all on me? Look, dude, write it up. Have y'all read John Mark's books yet? Have you read? He said he read Searching for the Pattern. Hey, then write a response to it. That's what I said the other night. I'm doing a favor for everybody. There is 3 hours worth of material with me and John Mark, and all of y'all who don't like it, who feel kind of confused about it, chop it up. Put it on YouTube. Rebuke him. Rebuke me. I'm fine with it. Read his book on women preachers. Write your own book about why the church should be governed by male leadership. I just don't understand how y'all get to take a salary, and I'm not trying to pick on Spencer, I'm saying the collective whole. I don't know how y'all get to take a salary and then do so little public speaking. And the thing about me, like if you saw the title on the YouTube broadcast tonight, Caleb Robertson is apologizing again. Kind of. I do not have a problem apologize. Like, I don't feel bad about it. Someone says, we're trying to make him sound good, like he can just so easily apologize. I don't feel like I'm hurting myself by apologizing. I don't. But I will say this, and someone says, boy, Caleb, you find yourself apologizing fairly often. And you know what? It's because I open my mouth. There's a bunch of preachers out here who take a salary, they talk about the same stuff week in, week out, and it's like, hey, you know what? If you got in the public venue a bit more, you know what? You might find yourself apologizing. And that's not a big deal, is it? I don't think so. And, again, like I said, it's not Spencer. I'm talking to the collective whole. And let's talk about this too. When I was coming back from interviewing John Mark Hicks, Spencer Strickland was getting in contact with someone who was in contact with me to immerse a woman. Dante in Waldorf, Maryland was contacting me to help him find somebody in Kentucky who could immerse a woman that he was teaching. And that's what I'm saying. It's like, here I come back from John Mark, and I'm also getting people hooked up with Spencer so that he can just do the immersing, but somebody else taught that woman. Dante did. How's this? How is it all on my back? Why doesn't GBN come in and just blast John Mark Hicks? Blast me for talking to John Mark Hicks. Isn't that something? That they are just so soft on stuff. And, maybe after this discussion, they're going to come out and really blast me. But I don't get it. We have all these different outlets. And so one minute, y'all don't like when I talk about stuff in the public. But then the next minute, you're like, hey, why isn't Caleb going to town on this in the public? Why don't they do it at Freed Hardeman? They got the lectures going right now. Why don't they do it on GBN? Where's anybody in Wesley Simon's group? Because I'm saying Wesley Simons used to put in all the newspapers in the area of Johnson City where he was telling them, don't even travel to Nashville to hear Rubel Shelley. And like I said, it's not going to upset me, but man, y'all could at least make things more lively, because what you're basically banking on right now is that I go do the interviews and I do the rebuking. Give me a break, dude, right? Let them rebuke. Now, switching gears where I said like a ping pong ball. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I read everybody's books, and this is not the extent of the books that I have read, and I do my word studies, and I do my Bible study, because we're all over here looking at Ephesians 5:11. We're saying, well, what constitutes the works of darkness? What is that? How far does that go? Ephesians 5:11. We're all having to look at 2 Corinthians 6, let's see, 6:14. Well, don't be unequally yoked. Well, can I be yoked without unequally yoked? Can I, like when it says yoked, how much contact constitutes yoke? What is it? Revelation chapter 14. That's not it. Where he says, come out from among them. That's 2 Corinthians 6:17. Let's just say it's in Revelation also, where he's going to say, come out from among them, be a separate people. And it's like, well, who? Who are we coming out from among from? So we're all having to do our Bible study. We're all having to do our word study. And then we're all going to look at what brethren say. Well, I'm looking at what brethren say, and I can't seem to please anybody.
2 Corinthians 6:17.
Well, I had that one. I'm looking for a Revelation passage. And so here's the next one. I was not surprised. I was not surprised that Bobby Valentine shared the interview. If you remember, I said the story was I'm at home. I had just interviewed Steve Wolfgang. It just hit YouTube. And I tell my little boy, I tell my 2-year-old, well, I said it to my wife. I said, man, John Weaver shared the Steve Wolfgang interview. And then my 2-year-old goes, John Weaver? And I said, you know John Weaver? I wasn't surprised when Bobby shared it because he's such good friends with John Mark Hicks. And he says this. He says, Caleb Robertson has done a series of interviews with various leaders. This one with John Mark Hicks goes on for a while. May have to break it up, but it is worth watching all of it. Hicks is a servant of the Lord. I was not surprised by that. What I was surprised by was the comment section. This is Ron Morgan. Ron Morgan says, the Robertsons want to disfellowship you if your grandmother's hairdresser flew over Pepperdine on her way to Hawaii. That was the first comment I saw. I laughed at that. I thought that was funny. It is funny. Is it a serious conversation? It is all a very serious conversation. We're talking about spiritual things, people's conscience and the Bible and whatnot. But I thought that was funny. Then I saw the next comment. And keep in mind, I don't know any of these people. I have seen him on Facebook. I've never seen this person on Facebook. Lori Moore says, Ron Morgan, as a lifelong Church of Christer, where only certain churches of Christ were acceptable, this one made me spit my sweet tea. I'm so grateful to know the sweet spirit side of Christ followers now. And I have to be honest with you. To me, that sounds an awful lot like reverse Phariseeism. What does the Pharisee do? He stands in the temple and he looks at other people and he says, God, I thank you that I'm not as other men are. I'm so thankful to be distant from people like Caleb Robertson. Hey, I think she's a blood-bought child of God. Ron Moore, blood-bought child of God. Bobby Valentine, blood-bought child of God. Am I not? Cheryl Russell, it's just nauseating. Makes me sad to see how big a following that the Robertsons have. I appreciate John Mark for doing this, although I am skeptical about what they will do with it. I actually do very little with the interviews. My dad and I come in, and typically what we do is we don't even talk about like John Mark or Rubel. I mean, the Rubel thing was just, unbelievable Rubel story. Usually what we do is we're pointing out the inconsistencies of the mainline institutional folk like Freed Hardeman. They talk big and bad, they run Rubel through the dirt, and then 40 years later they just act like none of it ever happened, and they are as inconsistent as you can imagine. I don't know. I'm like, I don't know what more I could have done. Like I'm saying, the ping pong ball, one moment someone's talking about I didn't rebuke him enough, and now I have ulterior motives to interviewing John Mark Hicks. Jeremy, I think his name is Kahn. I fully trust Rubel and John Mark as I have been a friend and pupil of theirs to this day, but I just cannot watch those with ulterior motives seek to become the newest to sling mud in order to become the newest leaders in legalist campaigns of old. I don't think that you watched the interview, because if you watch the interview, there is a line painted in the interview that goes from Ira Rice to Alan Hires and Keith Mosier, and it's that they were inconsistent. Now, I don't agree with John Mark on the women preacher thing. Yeah, but I said Ira Rice was inconsistent with his woman translator position. Their churches are dying, and it just doesn't feel like the Spirit of Jesus, especially as they leave people in their wake. You watched the interview, and you didn't think I had the Spirit of Jesus in this interview? Well, other folk don't think I had the Spirit of Jesus because I didn't rebuke him hard enough. Here's another one. Danny Dodd. What these motives, right? This is crazy, all the motives. Whatever Robertson's motives and purpose for these interviews, perhaps there is another larger kingdom purpose at play with John Mark and Rubel being the instruments of that. Personally, I thank them for speaking grace and truth into that platform. What could I have to get out of this where I noted all these great things that John Mark Hicks did, and I said, and they deserve to get credit? John Mark Hicks, he wrote that manuscript when he was like 14 years old. It got published when he was 16 years old. He skips his senior year. He goes to Freed-Hardeman. John Mark Hicks was getting his associate's degree in German so that he and his wife could go live in Germany as missionaries. And then his wife died. And he just said, I didn't know what to do with myself. So he continued further education. And he goes up into that Calvinist school, and he gets Robert Schenck to come into Westminster Seminary and lecture on election to all those Calvinists. And I said, that's monumental. And while he's up in Philadelphia, he's teaching on the radio once a week. And, he even himself, he dismissed it. And I said, no. I said, let's not dismiss it. I said, it needs to be talked about. You were teaching on the radio. I don't understand what the problem is. And then Nathan comes in. I don't know who Nathan is, but this is nice. He says, I don't know the Robertsons that much, and therefore as I watched it today without any prejudice to the host, I actually felt humility from Caleb. He disagrees a few, but with respect. Of course, John Mark has always been a great man of respectful conversation. Do you know what you guys are doing? You guys are doing to me exactly what these people were doing to Rubel. Here's what y'all's comments communicate. There are some things that I do that y'all don't like. And therefore, because some things I do that y'all don't like, you're not allowed to like anything that I do. Which is what y'all say the right does to the left. And if you watch all of my interviews together, you will find that that is the picture that's being portrayed. There are nasty people on both sides of the conversation. Steve Wolfgang said that. I said antis always get portrayed as crusty old curmudgeons, stick in the mud. And then I went through a couple of examples, and he laughed, and I said, but that's on both sides, isn't it? And he said, oh, of course. It's on the non-institutional side. It's in the mainline institutional side. It's in the mainline institutional side. It's on the progressive liberal side. This isn't where I'm basically saying I'm holier than you. I'm saying we're all dealing with the same problems. And some of them are disagreements in our actions. Some of the things are disagreements in our ways of thinking. And I think that some things are just simply we don't like each other. And I'm here tonight saying that I certainly don't want to do the last one. And another thing that I didn't even say for my own credit, I shook his hand and apologized to him. I said, the school I went to painted you in a bad light, and I drank it in. I said, I apologize to you. I don't know what more y'all want from me. Caleb Sams, he shared the interview, and he says, we should talk to each other more than we talk about each other. Really good, respectful conversation. Whoever Chase Lindsay is says, you're joking, right? And then he posts that on February 27th, I did a broadcast against Democrats. I said, I talked to Democrats, and none of them appear to be church. These are people protesting in front of City Hall where I live. I said, I talked to the Democrats, and none of them appear to be churchgoers or Bible believers. They all said things like more than two genders. They promoted Darwinism. And they all said the Bible cannot be trusted. And so Chase Lindsay comes on when my interview is shared, and he says, if this is a man or a woman, I don't know. But they say, you're joking, right? Well, here's what his thinking is. Because I do some things that he doesn't agree with, therefore nothing I do could possibly be good. Well, isn't that the problem that the left has with the right? The right doesn't agree with some of the things that the left does, therefore nothing they do on the left side is good. Well, now the left is saying back to me that nothing I do can ever be good because some things are bad. But then look what happens. Wayne Scott comes in and says, well, I concur with Caleb on this one, though I don't have a dog in this fight anymore. I don't know what that means. But what I said about Democrats, he came on and said, I agree. Now, I do want to have an excursion. Isn't it something that the same people who for the past 4 years told everybody don't talk about politics are now so up in politics and they're out protesting in front of the city council? Hey, don't worry about it. Just love your neighbor. And I love my neighbor. And I believe that that is the highest standard. Love God, love your neighbor. But they had all this stuff and they told Republicans, be quiet. But now it's like they're the ones out protesting and we still had to be quiet. I don't get it. I thought you guys would love it. I thought that you guys would love that interview. I guess y'all weren't ready for it, but your kids are going to love it. Here I am. I'm saying I open up with Lagarde suggests to me that I owe Terry Gardner an apology. I say I'm going to give him an apology, but before I get over there, I'm just saying I am confused. How confused? I know what I think and what I believe. I'm having a hard time with what y'all really think. Because a bunch of folk won't stick to their writing, but they also won't, dismiss their own writing. And it's the same thing on the other side. Now, I'm just not going to be taking a back seat to anybody on this stuff. I can have the history conversation with a bunch of folk. I'm not saying that I know as much as everybody else, but I'm not just an idiot. And I think that y'all are missing the point. I'm talking to the left right now. John Raccoon Smith, he is saying to the Baptists, he said, I'll never leave you. I love you too much. And that is such a good note in the restoration thought. It was love. It was a unifying effort. Yeah, but he said that as he was getting kicked out of Baptist associations for telling them they were wrong. He had served communion to people they did not think deserved to have communion. He was reading from a Bible other than the King James Bible, and then there was something else. They had 3 charges against Raccoon John Smith, and they read them out in a service that he was in, and John Raccoon Smith stood up and he said, I am guilty to all charges. He was telling those people they were wrong. You cannot just go back into Restoration history and act like these guys never stood against anything. And it's the same thing for Alexander Campbell. He wrote the Lunenburg letters, there's no doubt. But why was Alexander Campbell getting kicked out of those Baptist associations? Because there was stuff he was saying he didn't agree with. He was telling people, I will never pledge my allegiance to the Philadelphia Creed. Confession of faith. Just on and on and on. And that's the ongoing discussion of, was the Restoration movement, was it a time frame where we sought out to restore the pattern? Were we restoring the pattern, or were we restoring the ancient order? Or was it a movement to unify everybody? And it's like you have these two thoughts and one is dominating the other. But I'm just saying, you can't look at John Raccoon Smith and say where he says, I'll never leave y'all because I love y'all too much. Well, they were kicking him out because he was telling them that they were wrong. And you know where I found that? Someone says, well, maybe you read Lewis Cochran. He wrote a book about John Raccoon Smith. No, that's not where I first saw it. I first saw it by reading Restoration Review 1976 in an article called They Called Him Raccoon. And that's why I say I'm not taking a back seat and I'm not going to be lectured to about basically I come in, I have these conversations, but it's not good enough. And I'm not, in the same way that I'm not in a conservative competition, I'm not in a liberal competition. Look, that's the thing is like where you come among, and look, I don't mean anything by it, but this is what it is and we are where we are. There are liberals, there are mainline, there's, antis. Steve Wolfgang said, I don't care if you call me an anti, we're all anti-something. I don't care if you call me an anti. And I also don't care if anybody starts calling me liberal. And, believe it or not, there are people out there who call me liberal. And I just don't care. But I am not going to be made to feel any type of way that I have read every single edition of Restoration Review except 2. I don't have a problem with it. And I could just go down the list where you say, we didn't know that Caleb would be so free-thinking to even read that stuff. Yes. And I'm just looking at it, and if Leroy Garrett was alive still, I would interview him, and I would say the exact same thing that I said to John Mark and Rubel. Leroy was very conservative on his own. He just granted more liberty than people thought that he should. But he didn't smoke. He was against smoking, against drinking, against gambling, against, dancing with someone who's not your wife. Just a bunch of stuff. Is there a bunch of stuff that he was wrong on? Yeah. Is there a bunch of stuff where you would say you don't agree? Of course. Now, I want to say this. I have not been totally wrong. As I go through everybody's books and I gather up all the info and I start trying to sift through the info, you can't say that I've been wrong, because when I did this, my dad and I, we sat down on the program, we talked about this. Pepperdine, 2023. In 2023, they had Dale Maynor, Bruce McClarty, Noel Whitlock, and David Skidmore. David Skidmore is a participant in Jeff Walling's Winterfest. Now, we made that note, and David Skidmore has not been back. And here's my thing about y'all never know why anything gets done, and I don't know why they do what they do either. Did David Skidmore say, I don't want to come back? Did they tell him we're not inviting you back? Is he sick? What? Noel Whitlock, Bruce McClarty, Dale Maynor. And so we made this note that there were 3 Pepperdine speakers in 23 and then 1 Winterfest speaker. And you know what has happened since then? B.J. Clark has not been back. Well, I can't be totally wrong, can I? Can I? Am I absolutely wrong? Why is it that Don Blackwell's not on it? And here's my question. Don Blackwell is essentially in charge of polishing the pulpit. Do they use David Shannon over there? I know that, what's his name? Matt Wallen. Matt Wallen praises David Shannon, but do they use him on the lineup? Look, all I'm saying is I'm trying to figure it out as much as anybody's trying to figure it out. And let me say that too. Let me go to the front. Let me just play a clip of Steve Wolfgang really quick. Are we good? Are we ready to go for our clip? Here we go. What I see in the open is him sharing the pulpit with Amy McLaughlin Sheesby, who's a woman preacher on staff at Abilene.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question. I mean, we just had John Mark Hicks to be on an electronic forum. We do a monthly preachers study here in the tri-state area that attracts. Used to be, before COVID, it was in person. Mm-hmm. We met at Joliet, which is kind of a central place, but guys from Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois would come. We went online, a Zoom meeting during COVID, and we attracted people from all over the place, so we've left it that way. So we looked at John Mark's book, I think in the March meeting, and I said, why don't we have him come and be on the April meeting? Mm-hmm. So we just had him, and I just had done an article in Truth Magazine a month or so before. We did an issue on progressive Christianity, and I reviewed his book as much as you can in 1,500 words. But I don't view that as me having, I mean, it's a level of fellowship. I mean, we're participating in discussion,
right?
But we're clearly disagreeing with each other. And, when I was on the bus with Brother McClarty and a lot of other people, including some other faculty from Harding, and we picked up some from Lipscomb, I'm frankly talking about, Daniel Sommer and that controversy. And I'm talking about the institutional controversy and what happened. We go back when we were in Pennsylvania and West Virginia and talk about the Campbell controversy. So it's not like I'm pulling punches, right, or not stating what my convictions are.
And so can I say, too, I don't want to create a room where no conversation is had.
Okay.
My issue is the conversations of division are not happening in the open.
Okay.
And so that's usually what people will say back to me is they'll say, well, you don't know what he said. And my thought is, yeah, I do. I listened to the lesson.
Okay.
He didn't say anything out there.
See, I'm so unplugged from...
Now, we'll stop there and we might come back to it in a minute. But you heard how he said, it is an interesting question. We're all trying to figure out how to do it. Some of us are. And some people have just given up on the idea. Well, I'm just not to the point where I'm ready to give up on it. And I also don't think that Steve is either, because he said, I have been out to talk at Pepperdine. He said, but I'll admit, when they brought in the foul-mouthed Lutheran woman preacher, I said, I don't want to be on there with that. So we all have these lines, and we're all working on it. And I don't understand why it's wrong that when somebody establishes, well, these are where my lines are, and I don't want to cross them, where someone else comes in and says, well, if you're putting your line over there, then you're going to get in trouble over here. What's wrong with that? I don't understand why that's wrong. And I haven't been totally wrong based on the things that they're doing. Polishing the pulpit, I've not been totally wrong. BJ, Don Blackwell, Aaron Gallagher. If I'm just wrong, and what I said I've been doing is basically going back to the old literature, why is Phil Sanders not on polishing the pulpit? So Phil Sanders, Edmond, Church of Christ, Edmond, Oklahoma. I feel like they're not called... Anyways, the Church of Christ in Edmond, Oklahoma, where Phil Sanders has his hub and he does Search for the Lord's Way. Well, they will regularly bring in Pepperdine speakers. His preacher's name is Randy Roper. He goes out and he has preached years ago on Pepperdine. And so we just said, what's going on with that? We said it out in the open. What's going on with that? Well, we didn't get any note. Nobody has. Nobody has a clue what's going on at Polishing the Pulpit. We just know that, like out of thin air, Phil Sanders is gone. Did Phil Sanders say, I don't want to come back? Well, did Phil Sanders say, I missed my plane? I'm sick. My wife is sick. Someone in my family's sick. On and on and on. Or did the people in charge say, Phil, you're going to have to do something with the fellowship situation at Edmond, or you're not coming back to this sound and conservative event? Everybody's trying to figure it out. Now, look, everyone knows Alan Hires. This is Tom Childers. Tom Childers is big time associated with Freed-Hardeman College. Now, I'm getting beat back and forth like a ping pong ball. I got folk over here saying that I don't rebuke enough. I got people over here saying I rebuke too much. I got people over here saying that I have ulterior motives to sit down with John Mark Hicks for 3 hours and tell his story. And I tell you too, I gave John Mark a card on his way out, and some stuff was in there that I don't remember. But I know that I told John Mark, love is not contingent on agreement. I love you, John Mark. And there's no way you could have known that. I get it. But still, I'm 31. And I'm following y'all's lead that you have abandoned. So now I'm going to introduce another video. Tom Childers, when I talk about backroom meetings.
I appreciate both of you sitting down with me short notice, and I guess I'll start with the question if I can. Does the congregation here have any type of relationship with Pepperdine in California or Abilene University down in Texas? How's y'all's relationship?
That's Earl Edwards. Micah is at the Finger congregation, Finger Church of Christ around Freed-Hardeman, and Micah is having a backroom closed-door meeting with Earl Edwards and Tom Childers. And I don't know how he did it. He did record. I'm not trying to I don't have a problem at all that he recorded them. I just don't know how he managed to get such a good shot. But I want to say this now. He asked them, how's y'all's relationship with Pepperdine and Abilene down in Texas?
With those two.
Well, I don't think we have a written policy that says anything about it, but I certainly wouldn't send a student to either one of them.
Earl Edwards just said he would not send a student to Pepperdine or Abilene. I don't get it. Okay? I don't know how old he is. Okay, he is my senior. I said a moment ago I'm not taking a back seat. I don't have a problem acknowledging that he is just massively my senior. And someone says he has forgotten more than you even know. Oh, no doubt. But now I have heard him say that, and I don't know what to make out of it. Now, that's Earl Edwards.
Okay.
I don't think Tom would either.
Okay. Well, I'm in agreement with you. And that's going on with the Christian Chronicle and their advertising of Jeff Wallen and Royce Money. Because again, people are looking at Freed Hardeman as a sound foundation. Milton Sewell being a part of that, and it's just
Don't look at Milton Sewell as having very much clout at Freed Hardeman.
okay. All right.
Yeah, I just don't
Dallas
want.
99.
That's Tom Childers. And did you just hear them throw Milton Sewell under the bus? I'm confused that when I come in and I talk about something like, oh, Caleb, you shouldn't have done that. They're a brother in Christ. Well, I didn't say they weren't a brother in Christ. But here they are saying, don't trust Milton Sewell. He doesn't have clout here. And they're going to talk even worse about Milton Sewell. And listen what they're also going to say.
Years as president.
Yeah,
He didn't
we
have
don't.
anything to do with Milton.
We don't really want to get in a position of where we're defending his actions.
Okay. And
Basically, what he does, I don't see that has any concern with us or with Freed Hardeman
Okay.
at this point.
All right.
And even while he was president, it was not a situation where that he was respected by the Bible department.
Okay.
I think you, brother.
Oh my, yes. If you knew how hard some of us tried to get him out.
Okay.
What? Earl Edwards just said, oh my goodness, if you knew how hard we were trying to get Milton Sewell out of the program, and he was not respected or appreciated by people in the Bible department. That sounds here's my thing too that I'm getting a bit tired of. I sit down with Lagarde, and he tells me that when he was at Pepperdine Law, that Tom Albright did not respect his work. And he said Tom Albright, was in the Bible department. He's upset with Lagarde that he's over in the law department. He said Lagarde doesn't understand culture and on and on. And I said, boy, that is shocking to me because I thought that Tom Albright, in my ignorance, I don't have a problem. I never met Tom Albright. I just read his stuff. And I do. I read Tom Albright's stuff, and I'm always talking to people about Tom Albright's books, hearing God's voice. He loves forever. His love compels, but still, I'm noted as this hateful legalist, on and on and on. Why? I read Tom's stuff. I got more books by Tom in my office. If I be lifted up, he wrote that book, and he's got another one on the book of 1 John. I've read those. I went all the way back and got his books on rhetoric, that I bet a bunch of people haven't read. But anyways, he's at Pepperdine, and Tom Albright doesn't respect him. At the end of his interview, I start talking to Lagarde, and I say, well, when you go to Lipscomb, like 1995 to 2000, how was that? Not good. What? Nah, not good. He said they didn't really like having me there. Well, then you go over to Freed Hardeman, and they're dogging Milton Sewell. We tried to get him out, and he wasn't respected. And it's not just Milton Sewell.
And the president that is there.
Congregation was looking into funding this work.
Anybody that tell him that he doesn't have much clout at Freed Hardeman.
Right.
He doesn't represent Freed Hardeman.
Okay.
But now you're going to run into a very serious problem if you look at this and you automatically associate him with Freed Hardeman right now.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's true that he's president, but there have been a lot of presidents who have moved on. I'm not talking about Freed Hardeman, but
Right.
others. Brother Clay went into what was the Presbyterian Church, so you can't judge the school by what the president does when he decides something like this years after he is the
By
president.
the way, there hardly any of us believe anything that the Christian Chronicle says is very sound.
Okay. All right.
For years. In fact, even though he was one of the least firm among us when he was here, that is, the least aggressive in speaking up, even Dow Flatt, when he was still living, wrote them and objected to their very liberal stance.
So in a backroom meeting, Earl Edwards says, we tried very hard to get Milton Sewell out of here, and then he said, and none of us trust the Christian Chronicle. Now, did you hear him say to Micah, and I also want to say this too. I don't think that they're being ugly to Micah. I don't really think that they have been condescending to Micah, and you all know that Micah is not happy with me. He's not happy with my dad. I don't have a problem saying Micah did a really good job in this conversation. Everybody in the conversation stayed calm. Micah's in-laws were very much affiliated with this congregation. But everything's going really good. I think the only thing that people are not going to like is like the recording of it. Why is that such a big deal? You're telling me that you wouldn't have said this stuff in the open? You wouldn't have said the Bible department didn't respect Milton Sewell and we worked very hard to get him out of here and nobody trusts the Christian Chronicle. Now, he said, you're going to have to be careful with this, how you do this. If you see somebody over here, you got to be careful with it. Well, you already heard him say that Earl Edwards said he would not send anybody to Pepperdine or Abilene. But now listen to this. As far as lectureship speakers go, listen to what he says.
Down a trail where there's never going to be an end, because what you're going to end up with is somebody else appears on a lectureship that you would probably accept, but then this person appears on it. So there's no ending on that.
Right.
What you've got to do is to look at each situation and not judge somebody by association. It's guilt by association because they appear.
Now, if somebody went to Pepperdine lectureship every year, I'd have a very definite. In fact, if they even went one time, as far out as it is, I'd have questions about it. As I told you,
Tom Childers, Earl Edwards, as the words are leaving Tom Childers' mouth, Tom is saying you can't really do guilt by association. And then Earl Edwards says, yeah, but if you went one time to Pepperdine, I would doubt you. He said, I'd have questions for you. What does that mean? You're now going to come under the gun of Earl Edwards because you're suddenly not sound enough? Why? Because I went to Pepperdine one time. What's wrong with going to Pepperdine? Well, Rubel Shelley's going to be out there, and Freed Hardeman has been cutting him off since 1984. Max Lucado will be out there. Well, what's the problem? See, they do it. They just have their line, and then they be inconsistent. So I listened to the recording of Tom Childers and Earl Edwards, and while they said out of one side of their mouth, don't do guilt by association, they in fact do it. They're not going to have Rubel Shelley. Look, I will be flabbergasted if they had Rubel Shelley come back. They're not going to have Max Lucado come in. They're not going to have Doug Foster come in. And they have this list of people while they pretend that they don't do it. And that's where I say, I read the books and I said, this is the idea. I accompanied the books over to my biblical text. I looked at the biblical text. I look at these people's books. I look at what's going on over here. And I say, well, I don't agree with what's going on over there. And they say, we don't agree with what's going on over there either, but we're going to bring these people from over there and here. Well, we're not going to let him come from over there. We're only going to let him come from over there. It doesn't make sense. And I don't know why it's wrong for me to say that it doesn't make sense. Now, if someone went to Pepperdine once, I would have questions for them. Keep listening to the audio.
I told Ralph Gilmore I wouldn't go. He didn't go. Mm-hmm. And I was head of the Bible department when I told him that. And
Earl Edwards, apparently Ralph Gilmore wanted to go to Pepperdine, and Earl Edwards told Ralph Gilmore, you cannot go to Pepperdine. Am I wrong? Now, here's how, again, getting just beat back and forth like a ping pong ball. So you guys said guilt by association, and here's little old me out there waving y'all's banner, guilt by association. But if I switched banners, y'all would shoot me for having this banner. If I started hollering out, hey, fellowship without endorsement, man, y'all would shoot me. You would hate it. But it is, in fact, what everybody's doing. Everybody is doing a little bit of fellowship without endorsement. And so what everybody has is this fictitious line, and when I cross your line, I'm dead meat. And when I cross Ted's line, I'm dead meat. But as long as I don't understand how it works this way, that if I'm to the left of you, somehow, well, I'm just an idiot and I don't know any better. But when I get to the right of you, I'm hateful now. My ignorance turned into this villain because I'm to the right of you. And that's what Holger Neubauer said about going into Wesley Simon School. He told my dad, he said, Johnny, the moment that Caleb gets to the right of Wesley Simons, Wesley will be done with him. Yeah, well, I think the moment you get to the right of Holger Neubauer, he'll be done with you. And I don't really know too many people that that's not the case for. When you get to the right of them, you're just this hardline legalist who doesn't think straight. I don't know what y'all want. I do. I know that you know I don't care. But I do care about you. And that's what I said to Rubel. I said about, I said these young guys, they're climbing the ladder, and the ladder just gets kicked out from underneath them. And Rubel said, yeah, well, that doesn't really matter. My statement to Rubel was, I said, you are a person. These people who the machine treats this way, I mean, these guys had no problem being in a back room and saying this stuff to Micah. I mean, Micah wasn't pulling their teeth. Micah didn't have a gun to their head. They just volunteered it. And I hear a lot of trash talk. There's a quote in this book where a young man goes to a preacher's meeting and he says, I didn't know that preachers were such gossips until I went to the bi-monthly area preachers meeting and all they were doing was talking trash about Archie Word. Folk don't have a problem about talking about each other. They have a problem because it's uncouth to do it in open air. We do that in the back room. Well, I'm just not doing that. And I told Steve Wolfgang, I don't like this business of Steve Wolfgang is, we're going to say, well, Steve Wolfgang's a brother. And then someone says, yeah, but I don't care about him. I don't like that. I don't want to do it with anybody across the board. Do we have disagreements? Yes, but I don't want to act like Jesus didn't die for these people. What I want to do is to be able to have the conversation, and I also want to be able to have the conversation without somebody just calling me a right-wing, nut job, closed-minded, short-sighted, you're telling me I can't disagree without getting that list of adjectives? Where's Terry Gardner in all of this? So, Lagarde tells me that I owe Terry Gardner an apology, and I say I'm going to give him one. And this is where I find myself. In all honesty, this is where I find myself. I sit down with Lagarde after doing all this research and reading the material, and then it's amplified when I have the conversation with him. So Lagarde says that the last time that he spoke at the Pepperdine Lectures, which I think would have been 1989, this would have been the time. Look, this is the program and these are the topics. And Lagarde said, I wanted to have an open discussion, also AKA a debate. He said, I wanted to have a discussion with Oliver Howard, maintaining unity in the face of divisive controversies. And then Lagarde had the topic, men of strength for women of God, roles and relationships in a time of change. And so Lagarde wanted the debate. And he told the audience, we keep monkeying with what the Bible says about gender roles as far as church leadership. He said you give it about a handful of years, you're going to start monkeying with the gender discussion as far as marriage. And he said, I'm not saying to the audience right now that that's what y'all think or that you even mean to promote that. He said, logically speaking, that's where you're headed. Now, I had seen Lagarde written up so many times that I had my mind made up that this guy is just going to be, just exactly what I said about John Mark Hicks. He only knows John 3:16. Well, I do my research, and I got to tell you too, I'm not above asking for the credit out here. I have to tell you, I did my research sooner than later, okay? I did my research at age, for him, like 29 to 30, and I'm able to come into the room and have perspective that a lot of people wouldn't have gathered up until they were like in their 60s or 70s. Well, someone said I had the time, and I started looking at it, and I kind of think maybe we were pulling the wrong rug on that. Well, I sit down with Lagarde. I don't know if you remember it or not, but I shook Lagarde's hand and apologized to him also. So here's where I am. I trust that when Lagarde was in those atmospheres, that he was saying what needed to be said. So, if I can say that for Lagarde, someone says, why can't you say that for Terry Gardner? And to that statement, I would say, you're right. And I had to do the same thing with Steve Wolfgang. Steve Wolfgang, if you heard a moment ago in the video, he's asked me the question. He said, it is an interesting question. Everybody's trying to figure out how we're going to do it. And so here's what Steve says to me. Steve says, well, I go on the restoration trip with the folks from Harding University. And he said, Bruce McClarty is there, Bruce's wife is there, a handful of other people are there. And he says, that's where he says, I'm not pulling any punches. I'm telling, quite frankly, what I think. And in the interview, I said to Steve, I find it counterproductive. Well, just like a week or two ago, I sent Steve Wolfgang a letter in the United States Postal Service, and I told him, which I had already said it on Tuesday morning Bible class on YouTube. I said, Steve, I am walking that back. And I said, people are going to be on that restoration bus. They're going to stop and see all the sights, and they are going to hear perspective. And I said, if they had to hear anybody's perspective on the past, I said, I'd like it to be Steve Wolfgang. Now, as I said to him in the interview, I said, I'm not trying to create realms where conversation doesn't happen. But I think maybe this has been my problem, is that I would say conversation can only happen if it's an established debate, which is not the case. Now, if someone says, well, if you just say, Steve Wolfgang got on that bus, and maybe it's with people that you don't think are doing the best job, so where do you think Steve Wolfgang is? That's where I say I have a level of trust with Steve Wolfgang, for Steve Wolfgang, that I think that he said what needed to be said. And then someone says, well, why didn't you do that for Terry Gardner? Well, here's where I'm saying that in the future, I am going to try to do that with people. Now, when Terry Gardner was down there, and I think he was lecturing on Austin McGarry. Yeah, I bet he talked about the different things that cause for division. And this is what basically in the open forum thing where he said, I just happened to be sitting by him. But if he gives a talk about what was happening in Texas at that time frame, then I think it's information that people need to hear. And I also want to say this too. There is a bit of me, if I'm being honest, where someone says about the historical talks, where somebody says, well, how many times are we going to get in a room and talk about history with each other? This person knows it, this teacher knows history, that person knows history, and that person knows history. They haven't changed. Their thoughts haven't changed. Well, this is what I say. The audience changes. So it's like, well, someone says, well, he went there once. Does he ever need to go again? Might be a different audience if he goes again. Same thing for Steve Wolfgang. The same people that are on the bus are not going to be on the bus again. So the audience changes. So yes, I think that the continuation of historic conversations, I'm saying conversations that revolve around history, they matter. Someone says, well, we don't have to have the conversation. People can just buy the books if they want to know about it. Well, we all know people don't buy books, and when they buy the books, they don't always read the books. So, yeah, I am incorporating into my playbook that I have to have a certain level of trust. Now, as I'm saying that, and here's the thing too, do you know that some people will not like that I'm saying that about Lagarde? I have a level of trust for Lagarde that when he gets in the room, he said what needed to be said. And there's a bunch of people just sticking their finger in their mouth right now. Gag, Lagarde. But then there's people who are going to say it about Steve Wolfgang. And that's where I'm saying that we all have this text, and I'm spotting where people have drawn their lines, and I raised my hand, I said, yeah, but what about this? And that's where they said, who let that legalist in the room? I got to the right of somebody. Forgive me. So what I am saying is, to Terry Gardner, when Lagarde says I owe an apology, well, I apologize for that. And I will say this, which is coming up in just a moment. I did not set out to just ruin Terry Gardner. And I have to say this again, where I just said, look, he's down there, he's talking about historical aspects. I am sure that he said what needed to be said. And I'm giving it that to him, and I'm apologizing, and I give that trust to Steve Wolfgang, and I do give that trust retroactively for what it's worth. I wasn't even born yet, but I'm looking backwards, I'm saying, yeah, I'm sure that Lagarde told him what they needed to hear. But I'm also saying that y'all needed to hear some of that stuff in the 1984 open forum from Rubel. I'm not coming in the room to salute anybody's flag. And I said to him in the interview, I knew exactly what that meant, and everybody else in the room knew what it meant. And it meant that Rubel was not going to do what William Woodson did in the 1992 open forum, Preachers Forum, where William Woodson started out by saying, I agree with Guy Woods, Gus Nichols, Franklin Camp, Roy Hearn, on and on and on. And if you guys don't even know who that is, then that's your problem. I'm not doing that. I don't bow down to anybody. I'm not in anybody's party. And I'm not going to wave a flag. But as I'm sitting here saying, I trust that he probably said what needed to be said. And I trust that Steve said what needed to be said. And now I'm looking at Terry and I'm saying, yeah, he probably said what needed to be said. Now, I'm still going to say that there are some pulpiteer politicians out here that I don't trust that they said what needed to be said. And I have a list of speaking, like recordings, secret record. No, they're preaching in the pulpit, and I've got the recording that they happily take money from these people that they call liberals, and they go back home and just whatever. You know, Steve Wolfgang has a very good story where he goes into Europe and he teaches in a university setting. And he says, he actually makes this deal with them where he says, yes, I will come and I will teach. He said, on two conditions. Number one, he said, don't pay me. He said, because I don't want monetary fellowship with y'all. And then number two, he said, I want to have my own extra classes where I get to teach on what I disagree with. Oh, boy, that's good stuff. And I just don't know why we're not all getting that. And, you know, I put up a book from Denton Lectures, where Denton Lectures on 1 Corinthians, which has a lot of marriage and divorce conversation, the Denton Lectures brought in Dan Billingsley, Louis G. Hale, maybe they brought in Olin Hicks, and they let them present pieces of information that they did not agree with, and then they got response time. I don't know why we don't have more of that. But I'm going to come back to that idea. Now, look, I also don't have a problem saying, can you give me a break for trying? Let's talk for a moment. I'm 31, and I am a preacher's son. Y'all, have y'all met some of the preacher's sons out here? And y'all are so mad at me for trying. I am trying to be diligent. I am trying to have the conversation, and I'm trying to extend out to folk. And this is the biography of George S. Benson, who was the president of Harding College, and the title is Sometimes in the Wrong but Never in Doubt. That's called trying. That's called a person who is involved and is trying to think, and someone says, you know, well, Caleb just puts his foot in his mouth. Well, my mouth is open because I'm talking, and as I said, there's a bunch of pulpiteers out here who take fat salaries, and we never hear any type of mental contribution from them. I just don't get it. Can you give me something? Seriously, can you give me something? Now, look, I am about to continue this conversation, and this is where I'm going to lose some people. And my producer tonight is a married man, and I am a married man, and I said to him, who is married that has never given what is called a backhanded apology? And I do it with my wife, and my wife does it to me, and then we laugh, and we move on. It's a part of the joke, okay? Leroy Garrett would give his wife, Weta, he'd give her flowers, and he would say, I goofed up, I love you, I'm sorry. Now, look, are you married to Terry Gardner? No, but I am Terry Gardner's brother. And I don't know any siblings who haven't given backhanded apologies either. I don't know why he got so upset. When you are the one of two contributing editors to the book called Foy E. Wallace Jr., Soldier of the Cross, I don't know why he was so bent out of shape about that. And my thing was, I'm not trying to walk back my apology. I apologize. And I really mean it. And I'm out here saying that I'm growing, and I'm trying, and I'm taking these pointers. You know, I took it off of Lagarde, and I applied it over to Steve, and I'm applying it to Terry Gardner. But my thing in the discussion was, I said, Orpheus Hayward is just like anybody else that y'all said we shouldn't fellowship. But now somehow it's okay. And my statement also was, people at Freed Hardeman would have had a cow if he said, I'm just sitting on the podium. Well, they would have had a cow if he was sitting next to Rubel. People had a cow that I was sitting next to Rubel. So I don't know why it was so upsetting to Terry. And look, this is a public venue. He called me out in a public venue. I posted the Steve Wolfgang interview to what's called the Stone Campbell group, which is a Google group. And Terry Gardner saw it and he said, I don't know Caleb Robertson. And here it is, Joe S. Warlick. He said, after I spoke on Joe S. Warlick at this year's Freed Hardeman lectureship, I was informed of the following 4-minute video by Caleb and his father about me for appearing on a lectureship. And he says this, Caleb did not contact me before posting this video, nor any time since it was posted. It's a public thing. I'm not giving up on that. I do not have to engage with every single person when they do something publicly. In the interview with Steve Wolfgang, Caleb says he knows of me. And I told Steve Wolfgang that Terry also was upset with me. We apparently must have had some type of conversation for me to say that. And he says, if memory serves me correctly, the last Pepperdine lectureship program I spoke on was in 2012 on the life of Austin McGarry. He said, I believe Steve Wolfgang was speaking on the same program that year or perhaps the year before. This was 12 years ago. And let me tell you, I knew that Steve Wolfgang had been at Pepperdine before I got there, and we had that conversation. But here's my next thing. He says to this in front of everybody in the Stone Campbell group, and this is what I said back. Terry Gardner says, I have much to learn. I don't mind that or even disagree. I am 31 years old. I am learning. It's unfortunate that the only note Terry could make about my interview with Steve Wolfgang actually had zero to do with the interview with Steve Wolfgang. I really thought that Terry would have enjoyed the interview. I did that one thing wrong, and suddenly my interview with Steve Wolfgang has no value. Someone says, well, Caleb, these people are your brethren. Well, I'm a brethren. Right? I are one. That's what Lagarde said. So then we finally have a little bit of talk amongst ourselves. And this is the statement. Can you take me out of the shop, please? Terry says to me, I was invited to speak at the 2023 Southwestern Christian College Lectureship on Restoration History Stone Campbell Movement in late September 2023. He says, I know that word should be very few. I know very few African American brothers or sisters. I accepted and upon arrival found myself also on a panel with 5 men, only two of which I knew. Quite by chance, I sat next to Orpheus Hayward on the panel. He was a man I had never met nor heard of. I don't recall we had any personal conversation unless it was a word or two of greeting. We did not talk after the program, nor have we had any connection with him since the program. I would point out, though, that Orpheus Hayward treated me with more respect than you have. Then he gives me a David Lipscomb quote, and then he says, all the best, Terry. So, this is just that classic note that I've been making where the person says, I didn't know, I didn't talk to him, I still haven't talked to him, whatever. Okay, I don't know, I know, I don't know about that one. You know what I'm saying? We just have zero responsibility to check at all. And I'm saying this only appeals to the main line. But it's like, well, what if he had just wandered in the room and he said, I didn't know anybody, and they sent me down next to Max Lucado? What can I say? Then no one would be fine. This is that moment again. Someone says, boy, you said that a lot tonight. I just don't get it. I don't get how we have zero, pause about, well, let me just see what it is. Let me see who's going to be there. And, this business of where, the statement is, I'll go anywhere and I'll say what I need to say. Well, if you don't know what you're, quote, up against, then how would you ever know what to say? Now, I got to tell you, I'm having this conversation with myself right now as we're doing this talk. If you don't look at all, how can you know what you're up against? And I just have to say, I am not going to be dishonest, and I am not going to be partial. John Shannon himself says, when he goes in somewhere, he tells them, don't tell me anything. But do you know that John Shannon is not trying to stay blind? John knows that he is going to hit on a variety of topics. And if he hits on it and people get mad and they say, the preacher put you up to that, he gets to say, I'm just out here preaching the truth. Now, what am I going to do if Terry Gardner says, no, I mean, I didn't look, but I knew that I was going to cover these bases. And I mean, if I hit some of that stuff that they needed to be hit, then, they say, well, did Caleb Robertson put you up to this? And he just says, no, I didn't. No one put me up to it. I'm just out here preaching what I think needs to get taught. He has the right to do that. I'm going to cover my bases, and I don't want anybody trying to say that so-and-so put me up to it. This is what I said back to him. When you said what you just said is what everybody said. I had no clue who he is or what he teaches. And I asked him, did you read Alan Heyer's book on fellowship? Because Alan is an FHU man, and he certainly expects us to know who's doing what when we go there. And I said this, are you saying that you don't have fellowship with Orpheus Hayward? When you say, I don't know who he is or what he teaches. And then that's my next question. You met him in Terrell, Texas. Would you vote to bring him to the Freed-Hardeman lectures? If you would not vote to bring him to the Freed-Hardeman lectures, would you appear with him again elsewhere? FHU men called Rubel a false teacher in the 1980s, but somehow Orpheus is getting a pass by a handful of Freed-Hardeman men 40 years later. He says, the quote about Lipscomb, I said, to your Lipscomb quote, I've not listened to misrepresentations of you. Here's another point where someone's going to say, well, I didn't like it. Why? Look, someone said you shouldn't have said this for Steve Wolfgang. Steve Wolfgang complimented you multiple times in our video, and I left every single one in the video. That's not a bad statement at all. I didn't know what was coming. Steve Wolfgang complimented you. I thought I was going to put words in Steve's mouth. Steve Wolfgang complimented you multiple times in our video, and I left every single one in the video. I said I could have edited them out, but I didn't. Did I misrepresent the 4-minute YouTube video? Were you not in fellowship with Orpheus Hayward? And then I just say this, is this how it would have been if I had contacted you before I posted the 4-minute video? A brief response from you followed by a quick dismissal. I still don't, and I said this, I don't want to be adversarial with you. You are my brother. I don't want to be, I'm telling Terry Gardner, I don't want to be adversarial with you, Terry. You are my brother, Terry. And I'm just out here, younger brother asking the older brother, younger brother asking the senior brother, is there no sense of responsibility? I am asking him the same questions that I asked Lagarde, that I asked Steve, and Steve said, it's an interesting question. I asked Lagarde, do we call names? And he said, sometimes. And then I tell you, and I tell you right now too, what I'm not doing is I am not now, after I have apologized, going on another note trying to smear Terry. I'm trying to tell you that I am trying to figure this stuff out. And I'm not the only one. I don't know how old Terry Gardner is, but I'm saying there are a lot of me's in the world who are trying to figure out what we're really doing, because we, the young, look, I'm a millennial. So the millennials are looking at the boomers and we're saying, hey, y'all wrote a bunch of stuff that you're really not following anymore. Are y'all expecting me to follow what you wrote 40 years ago, or am I kind of getting to do what you do? Do I get to go in with no checks and balances and I didn't even look? Do I get to do that? Now, I'm not trying to smear. I'm just simply having the conversation, and I'm saying I'm trying to figure this out. So when did we have those other... Let me go out of this. Is there a date? This is from September 9th, 2024. He said that I had a bunch to learn. And I said, I don't mind that. I don't even disagree with it. I am learning. And then we emailed September 11th, 2024. Hadn't heard from him since. And then I tried to email him again on February 20th. I tried to email him on February 20th and I never heard back from him. Now, someone might say, Caleb, you just ought not air all this stuff on YouTube. What is the difference in this and having a paper? And I tell you, I don't care. Someone says, well, this is something that would show up in Contending for the Faith. Ira Rice. Yeah, and you know what they did at the Restoration Forums? They talked about Ira Rice on tape, and those tapes made back to Ira Rice. Did nobody stop and say, hey, boy, Ira's going to feel bad when we talk about him on this tape and he hears it? It's in the papers. It's all over the place. If you read One Body, who was One Body talking about? The people who they thought were closed-minded. The non-irenic spirit. Now, February 20th, I sent an email to Terry Gardner, and I start out, Terry, I just wanted to reach out again and see if there was any way to have dialogue with you. As I said before, I don't want to be adversarial with you. And I then quote Matthew 5:23 and 24 to him. I said, I'm attempting to perform this scripture with you because I know you're upset with me. My perception is that you've not wanted to talk to me any more than you thought I wanted to talk to you. My perception is that I agitated you, and then you just wanted to tell me off. Do I not get to have a reaction based on what I see and then discuss it openly? Your actions were public. My response was public. Now, you might think, Caleb should have tried to talk to me before he blasted me. Well, I think Terry should have thought about what it would look like before he shared the stage with Orpheus Hayward. You say, I don't know who Hayward is. I say, do better research before your speaking engagements. That's really not that crazy to just say do a bit of research before you go somewhere. I would like to talk with you instead of having the imaginary conversation with myself that I wrote in the above paragraph. And then I said this to him also. What if my views have been changing since that video? And then I said this, obviously you're under no obligation to respond. However, I am trying, and it's not because anybody has a gun to my head. I'm trying to talk to him. Put my phone number, that's my direct contact. He's got my email, we've emailed. Somebody tell Terry Gardner that I emailed him lines of communication with Matthew chapter 5, 23 and 24, and then I came on YouTube and I made a public apology to him. And if someone says, well, he's not going to like it because even Caleb, you said that it's backhanded. Well, I don't mean it to just be backhanded, but what am I supposed to do? Like, okay, I did something that I myself don't like. I have apologized for it, and from now till eternity, I have a gag order. See, that stuff doesn't make sense. Now, can I insert just a little bit of humor? Ed Harrell was somewhere lecturing, I don't know where it was a college setting, and someone who they knew about circles within the Church of Christ, but they didn't know where Ed fell. And this guy comes in, a young guy, and he says to him, he says, Dr. Harrell, I found something out about you. And he said, oh yeah, what's that? And then the young man says, you are an Annie. And then Ed Harrell, he says, son, you don't even know the half of it. I'm an Annie. Now, I might have the wrong Terry Gardner, but I started looking at different papers. The Examiner, which I believe was put out by Charles Holt, Volume 1, Number 2, examples, like second page article, Terry Gardner. Faith and Facts Quarterly, what does that say? October 1994. Cled Wallace, the ace writer, Terry J. Gardner, this is an old paper, Indianapolis, Indiana. Now, like I said, I didn't have that 4-minute segment in a video because I just set out and said I'm just going to try my best to ruin the reputation of Terry Gardner. And like the young man said to Ed Harrell, Dr. Harrell, I found out something about you. You are an Annie. Terry, are you an Annie? And if so, I didn't set out to say I'm just going to impugn his conservatism. I'm going to march right up to him. I'm going to take his conservative car away from him. He's never going to get to wear a conservative badge again. That's not what I'm trying to do. And if that joke wasn't funny, it wasn't funny. But again, I'm trying here, okay? I have apologized, and now we're moving forward. I'm still going to have the conversation. And it's not like I don't really care about the contest. We have positions, we have lines, we all have convictions and conscience. And there's a really good line. We're going to start talking, since I brought up Ed Harrell, we're going to start talking about this book where there's a line in here where Ed Harrell says what this fellowship conversation, our convictions and our conscience in Romans 14. And what Ed says is, what I'm talking about is dissonance. And he said, we all deal with dissonance to a degree. And then he says, the thing that I'm trying to determine is how much dissonance can I put up with? Well, I don't know anybody who just likes dissonance. Do you know cognitive dissonance is the idea where you have two competing ideas going on in your head and one of them will win. How much dissonance can you put up with? Well, some people can put up with more dissonance than the others, obviously, which is in Romans 14. But here's the thing. As I'm coming through, and I'm trying to figure stuff out, and then I start getting some dissonance going on, and I say, boy, with all this dissonance, I got to say something. And then folk who maybe have less dissonance than I do, they say, well, what you ought to do, Caleb, just shut up. And Terry didn't tell me to shut up, but you get it. It's difficult, which I think is why a lot of people don't even try to do it. But I'm trying. Another story about younger brother to senior brother, another Ed Harrell story is, he wrote an article about social gospel, which Terry probably knows this story, I'm sure he does. He wrote an article about social gospel directed at J.W. Roberts. And Ed Harrell said, J.W. Roberts doesn't know what he's talking about. He hasn't read any of this literature. He's wrong. Then a while later, J.W. Roberts said back to Ed Harrell in an article, he said, well, Ed said I didn't know what I was talking about and I hadn't read all these pieces of literature. And he said Ed was right. I hadn't read all those pieces of literature. He said, but once I read them, I discovered they prove I was right, and Ed's still wrong. And everybody got a good laugh out of that, and then Ed said, years later, we approached one another sheepishly and greeted one another. What can I do that I'm 31? I had no choice when I could be born. I had no choice who I was born to, and it's like, again, I said, you start looking around, how many 31-year-olds even care to have these conversations? And I don't want to be adversarial with anybody. To disagree is not to be adversarial. And to respond on public action is not adversarial. I got people responding on me publicly. I just don't always understand it. Now, I've reached out. I think I've done plenty. And I want to come back to this as we start wrapping up. Obviously, we're going. I apologize to my producer. We're going along. Here I am again. Hello. We are all trying to figure out fellowship. Hello. And I just have to tell you, there are senses where if you just said, what is a synonym for fellowship? And I would just say inconsistency. It's tough. We're trying to figure it out. To whom? In what venues? To what degree? So I'm reading all the material. And I come out and I have the conversations and I feel like sometimes people tell me I need to apologize and I just think they're wrong. And like I told that story about my dad saying that he didn't like how I addressed the Gary Summers stuff. And I said, I don't like it either. And then I apologized for it. And then when I saw Gary Summers and I apologized, he just went, I can get over it. And then I said I felt even worse because he was being so gracious to me. And I have to pause too for a moment and go back over here because I wanted to say, one thing too, y'all. One of the reasons why the interview with John Mark is so good is because John Mark is so gracious. The stuff that he said about Ira, like he said, we honor the good, I don't think that was fake. And when he said about William Woodson, he disagreed with William. And he said, I disagree. He said, but he was a good, godly, righteous man. That was not fake. And that's what makes his discussion so good, is that he is generous and it's sincere. And I'm just going out on this topic, y'all. This way, said what I said, here we are. Sometimes in the wrong, never in doubt. George S. Benson. Here's a note from Explorer in Search of Zion, which came out, I think, in February, and it was written by John Weaver. This is a note. The Brotherhood role of Christianity magazine as a lightning rod for criticism was repeatedly stated in Harrell's private correspondence with other editors. And then he says this, Ed says this, I believe it has been important to show that the bullying tactics of Guardian of Truth and others do not have a stranglehold on those trying to be Christians. We would be cowards to let that kind of intimidation go without challenge. I believe it has been important to stand up to them. It might even have been good for them. But I know that there are many people around the country who are delighted that we have provided some rational response to this recent pressure. David Edwin Harrell Jr., August 15th, 1990. Now, I just have to say that I don't see myself as a bully. And I do kind of have to say, y'all, someone says, boy, Caleb, you dish it out. Yeah, I've been taking it too. I was put out of Memphis School of Preaching, and B.J. Clark was very clear to say to me in his office, he said, I'm not kicking you out. You were choosing to leave. 6 one way, half a dozen another. I gave him an ultimatum, and then he gave me an ultimatum right back where he said, you either tell me you're sorry or you're leaving the school. Well, I was not sorry for skipping a Monday summer class to have a Tuesday morning Bible study and showing up from Virginia to Memphis 11 and a half hours later Wednesday morning. I just don't have a problem with that. Now, then Wesley Simons gives me an ultimatum and I choose to leave his school. I say stuff like I did in this program. I lose funding. My dad loses funding. My dad loses funding because of stuff that I say. So I don't see myself as a bully. I think that I take it on the chin quite often. And then I just keep trying to talk to folk. I don't think that that applies to me. And, you know, someone says, well, Ed called somebody a bully. But other people were saying similar stuff to Ed. He said, we would be cowards to let that kind of intimidation go without challenge. I believe it's important that we stood up to them. Someone might say, well, that sounds like bully language. Well, everybody thinks someone else is a bully. I just don't see myself that way. And to quote Steve Wolfgang, I do think that people who are in the institutions, they think that they're controlling the levers of power. You know, and that's the thing too. It's like someone says, well, he's a bully. Yeah, well, that guy thinks that he's everybody's kingpin. That guy thinks because he's the president of an institution that he's everybody's bishop, which goes back to the Foy Wallace and the B.C. Goodpasture conversation. Ed said about Foy Wallace just ends you. There's nothing you could do about it. But then B.C. Goodpasture was also telling Ed Harrell, where do you want to preach, Ed? I can insert you to any congregation in America that you want to. Well, if you could insert me, then it sounds like you could pull me out, which is what Foy Wallace did. And someone says, well, that sounds like it's a bully. Well, it depends on which side of the line you're on. If you're on B.C. Goodpasture's side, you think it sounds heroic. But if you're against him, well, it sounds like you're a bully. I just don't see myself that way. And I'm reading these books, and it's not like I don't read books and think about everybody else and say, yes, that's it. The other person is a bully. I try to reflect. And I also ask this question. When Ed Harrell wrote his 1962 booklet called The Emergence of the Church of Christ Denomination, on the other hand, look up here, on the other hand, the liberal point of view attracts the contented and the complacent. Reflecting on the importance of the pamphlet, historian Steve Wolfgang observes it was an in-your-face response to the cultured gentile among the churches of Christ, the people in Nashville who talked about not being a denomination, but were surely as much a denomination as the Southern Baptist. And I asked the question, what is wrong with, where is it? In your face. I don't have a problem with that. It doesn't appear that Steve had a problem with it when Ed Harrell did it, and that's where I say again, it depends on who was doing it at the time, and it depends on what they're doing it against. Go backwards. That's exactly what Lagarde said when I showed Lagarde that magazine of Gospel Advocate where he was on the cover of the Gospel Advocate in the late 80s. He saw it and he says, oh, well, that's when I was the hero. He said, because I was going after the people that we all agreed needed going after. And then he said, but then when I turned the gun a bit inwards, he said, that's when people start getting upset. And you know what Steve Wolfgang says about that? Steve Wolfgang said in his interview, we are very bad at controversy. I don't have a problem with in your face. And I told Spencer at the beginning of the broadcast, write me up, take my video and cut me up. I don't care. But what y'all are doing right now is you're asking me to correct everything under the sun, and you want my interviews to keep coming. So which is it? And while I'm doing both of them, I'm asking y'all, what are y'all doing and when are you going to start doing it? I don't have a problem with in your face. And then here's another one. This is talking about in 1964. It doesn't matter. In early 1960s, Ed Harrell participated in a talk as a member of the Church of Christ and he participated alongside of someone who was in the independent Christian church, and he participated with someone who was from the Disciples of Christ denomination. And when he started out, he called himself, Harold first established who he is. He is a legalistic fanatic and a biblical literalist with a harsh posture, aiming for the restoration of the ancient order of things, from baptism to the Lord's Supper to biological qualification for elderships and distinctions between individual and congregational activities and hundreds of similar questions seemingly technical in nature. Is it that I am harsh, or are some people just babies? Grow up, get some thick skin. If you're going to be such a sissy, you shouldn't have become a preacher. I got everybody under the sun, and I'm saying from my right, the main, they're not on my right. The mainline institutional people are basically upset that I didn't rebuke Rubel when I interviewed him. They're upset that I didn't rebuke John Mark. But then I come over here to my left, and people are upset even when I talk to John Mark. No. And this might be where someone says, well, Caleb, you're being a baby. I'm not being a baby. I went out on a limb, and to quote Rubel Shelley, he said, don't mess yourself up messing with me. And I did it anyways. And I told him, I said, I don't care what those people think. And then he said, well, I don't care what they think either. And boy, I don't, while y'all sit back and do nothing and then judge me for what I do. And to quote Archie Word, and I get to quote Archie Word because my dad found the sermon, Archie Word said, you know, on a football field, you know who's getting hit the most? The person doing the most. And you know who's not getting hit? The people on the sideline. So I don't mind it. This was all just food for thought. I just invite it, okay? And to quote this book, they were looking for people who would say, I will never give up, I will never give in, I will never surrender. And I'm trying to do that. I don't want to do any of those things. I am here for the conversation, and I'm staying for the conversation. And I want to have action. I don't have a problem. Write me up, cut up my video, do it. I would love to see it. What they're going to do, they're going to cry about it when I respond. Well, here I am at the bottom. Here's the rest of that quote. Ed Harrell's fanaticism is, however, committed to religious toleration, to defending everyone's right to their own convictions and their expressions. I tell you, I am working on the toleration. There's a picture of that toleration. I'm working on the toleration. But here's the thing. I will never be able to please you because as I become a tolerant person, that's where all these people over here are going to come in and say, no, that's too much toleration. Well, those people are over there telling me I haven't had enough toleration. Is it that I'm harsh? Or is it some people are babies and they are sissies and they are thin-skinned and they don't know how to disagree without being disagreeable, which is their problem. And I tell you, I sit there in the interview with Lagarde and he says, I don't like debating. I just started thinking right there, I am going to get my word in for the debate. And so I did. And when I'm with John Mark, there is a moment where I said, you know, my dad is talking about preaching on Hebrews 10:25 in the weekly assembly. And John Mark goes, well, let me press you on that. My posture changed. I start readjusting myself into that chair that wasn't the most comfortable chair in the world. And I'm getting ready for what's coming next, and I'm getting ready for how I'm going to respond, because I think that John Mark is about to call me out on Hebrews 10:25. That's not even Sunday. And then he doesn't even do it. And then I have to tell him, I was getting ready to talk about being Sunday. I said, which it's not. And he goes, well, I don't think it is either. Look, I got stuff I want to talk about when I go in there, and I tell you, I've been talking about as much as I want to talk about, and what I'm wanting to get on the scene is the inconsistencies of the mainline institutional folk. My dad talked about this the other night. And as far as Rubel said, don't mess yourself up messing with me, this picture for a bunch of people is going to be worse than the interview. And I hope that Rubel doesn't mind that I put this out here for the sake of conversation. But this is me, and this is me thinking out loud and looking at all around at my brethren who are God's children. And one time my wife asked me, she said, do you think that Rubel just has never seen anything that you wrote about him or any of the videos where you've talked about him? And I said, the way that Rubel has answered to a bunch of stuff, I said, I honestly think that he has never seen any of it. And he lets me come in his home and give him a present wrapped in Christmas paper, which I had been trying to give him since I interviewed him. And, but what if I said this? What if it's the case that I said, I don't think that he would act any differently, even if he had seen all the stuff that I wrote about him and put into videos? And I have to tell you, I really doubt that Jason Rollo would let me come inside of his home to give him a Christmas present. Quite a bit unannounced. I just happened to be in Nashville, and I texted Rubel Shelley and said, I still have that gift in the back of the car. Can I bring it by? And he said, yeah, I'll be at the home from this time to this time. And I said, that's great. This is a video that I have not shown y'all. I have it. And I haven't just thrown it out there. This is me talking to Jason Rollo, and this is him, I guess, giving me his best, which wasn't much. But this is a get well. I have the video, I have the audio, and I haven't aired it. My dad calls that running to press. My dad says we don't have to run to press the moment that we get something. Nobody has seen this except for me and my dad. Y'all have heard me allude to it, but nobody has seen it. And so this, as I keep reading and having the conversations and I keep just going down the road, I have this problem where the people who say, well, Caleb, I would think that you're more in agreement with Jason Rollo. Oh, well, depends on what you're talking about. But I have to ask this question, would he let me bring him a Christmas present? This is the autobiography from Jimmy Allen. Polarization. Jesus prayed, this is Jimmy Allen. Jesus prayed for the unity of his people, and we should too. However, I can say after 54 years in the church, we have become division personified. I have never seen us worse polarized. I'm not sure I was ever in the popularity contest, but I am so old and set in my ways that support of extreme causes has absolutely no appeal to me. If you want to bow down to Firm Foundation and its sectarianism, have at it, but don't look for me. If you want to contend that wineskins and its liberalism is our modern day deliverer, it is your privilege, but again, I will be absent from the chorus. And then Jimmy Allen says this, I happen to know and love Rubel Shelley and Mike Cope more than I know and love Buster Dobbs and his writers, but I cannot support either paper. And so where people say, well, Caleb, would you work and worship with Rubel? I would have to ask this question, what work is there to do with Jason Rollo? Work at his insurance firm? No, I'm talking about kingdom work. Debating, door knocking, 2-week-long tent meetings. Where is it? And a young guy asked me that. He says, Caleb, you use those terms work and worship. He said, so can you talk to me about that a bit more? And I said, well, number one, I said, there's hardly any work going on. I said, so who am I going to work with? And he laughed. And he said, I hear you. So what do you do with this? Jimmy Allen said, I don't agree with these guys. He said, but I like them better. I doubt that Jason Rollo would be happy that I showed up to his birthday singing. This is in Nashville at Lagarde's birthday singing on a Saturday, the day after I saw Rubel Shelley. That's my son. That's Everett. and he's helping Rubel cut open the present with a knife. Here we are at Lagarde's birthday singing. Everett, told Lagarde, "Happy birthday, Lagarde." We're there, and I'm saying, Lagarde hugged me and introduced me to his family, and he told his sister, he said, "This is Caleb Robertson. He knows more about our family than anybody on earth." And about 2 weeks later, Lagarde sent me an email where he gave me quite the rebuke. And I just don't mind that. And I read it, and my wife didn't read it, but I turned my screen to where she could see it, and I said, "This is Lagarde." And I said, he's, telling me the stuff that he doesn't approve of. And I read it, and Lagarde said, "Please don't respond right away." And I didn't. And my wife said, she said, "Are you upset?" And I said, "No." What is there to be upset about? And it's like, Lagarde he turned 80 years old that day. Lagarde is 80 years old looking at what a 31-year-old is doing, and he's saying, I don't care for that. Do you know how many 80-year-olds were watching Lagarde at age 31 and saying, "Yeah, I don't care for that"? We all have it. Nobody likes everything that anybody does. There's not a person that I say I like 100% of what they do 100% of the time. So someone says, "Well, if that person doesn't exist, what do you do?" Well, I guess I can go in isolation and just live and die alone. Or I can basically say what Ed Harrell said is we're all dealing with dissonance out here, and some people can put up with more dissonance than other people. And I see Rubel, and I visit with Lagarde, and I visit with John Shannon at the James Road Church of Christ. And you can ask John what he thinks about all this. John. Johnny Robertson. You're good friends with Johnny Robertson. What about his boy? What do you think about Caleb doing all this stuff? When we visited with John, he just said, the schools told us to avoid Rubel Shelley. And Rubel has this 8.5 by 11. These are old notes, right? It's old Rubel Shelley. But Rubel has this 8.5 by 11, and it's a paperback bound in burgundy paper, and it's just called A Survey of the New Testament. And John Shannon said, "They told us to ignore the person who wrote that." And he said, "Have you read that masterpiece?" You can ask John what he thinks, and John can tell you if he wants to. And you can call me back on the phone and say, "This is what John thinks about what you're doing." And I'll just say, well, he can take a ticket and get in line. And I don't mean that to be ugly. I love John. I just mailed John books in the mail the other day, and he sent me back a very nice thank you card. I love John. John loves me. But we all have these moments where someone says, "Well, he's crossed my line, and I just can't do it." And when I interviewed Mac Deaver, obviously I'm going to see Waylon. We did the interview in Denton, Texas. Sheffield Drive, I think is what it's called. And I visit with Waylon, and I say to Waylon, I tell Waylon, you wouldn't believe the stuff that people don't have of their own material. I said, Rubel doesn't have any wineskins. I don't know. I asked other people about stuff, and they didn't have it either. And I asked Waylon, I said, "Do you have any biblical notes left?" And he said, "Yeah." And then I said, "If you let me take them home, I will scan them into PDFs." And he said, "Here's a box with the entire set of biblical notes." And he sent that back to Virginia with me. A lot of people would have told me drop dead. I'm offering to do a service, and they still would have said drop dead. And he says, "Yeah, I got these biblical notes." And then he starts pulling out. I said, "If you got cassette tapes," I said, "I can digitize those cassette tapes." And he just starts bringing out all these cassette tapes, and I got them all. And this is the moment where someone says, "Well, what do you want to do that for Mac Deaver?" And because when you see the interview with Mac Deaver, I'm going to tell you, Mac Deaver did a bunch of good, and I want to preserve every bit of it. And the more that I keep thinking about the whole exchange from Mac Deaver and Marion Fox and Jerry Moffitt, Curtis Cates obviously was writing up Mac a bunch. Is anybody happy with the way that one shook out? we just lost Mac Deaver. And someone says, well, Mac Deaver teaches false doctrine on the Holy Spirit. Not everybody under the sun had to goad him into arguing it. And maybe I'm ignorant because I wasn't around back then. Someone says Mac didn't need any goading. He wanted to. Maybe. There's a bunch of folk who got a pass on that one. I'm in here. I'm reading, I'm thinking, I'm trying to figure it out. These other people who don't have it figured out are telling me that the way I have it figured out is wrong. Well, you don't have it figured out. And this is what I think. When y'all get so mad and you say it's because you're so rough, no, I don't think that's what it is. This is a quote, and I couldn't find it in my notes. It is in the book somewhere, where Ed Harrell said, I operate in intellectual spheres, but I will not be held hostage by it. And I think that's what's happening with a lot of y'all. I think that a lot of people have gotten so high into political circles and institutional circles, and they have gotten just like this wind and whiff of what they're doing, and that no one can speak against them. And if you do, you're a legalist and you're a hardline and you're blah, blah, blah. But also they have a list of people that are left-wing liberals and on and on and on. And I just don't do that. I don't know why I don't get any credit for trying to just be intellectually honest. I got a conscience like anybody else does. I'm dealing with dissonance over here just like anybody else does. And I was having this conversation with my dad earlier, weeks ago, my dad and I were talking. And he said, Caleb, I know you. And he said, you do not like to be managed. Well, neither does he. And quite frankly, I don't know anybody who just like, boy, howdy, put me in a box. Get a ball and chain on me. Well, we're all out here, and it's like we want to work together. But some people say they want to work together. What they really want to do is they want to manage you. And people get in contact with me and Dad, we tell them up front, I don't want to manage you. I don't want your responsibility on top of my responsibility. Can I try to be funny again? And maybe it's not. Y'all remember this song? And maybe that's not even the right guy who sang the song. We're from the country and we like it that way. I'm a man without a country and I like it that way. I will not salute anybody's flag. I am not going to bow down and kiss y'all's ring. I don't care what institution you have. I don't care what anything. Put any amount of stats next to it. And one of the biggest compliments I have ever been paid. I haven't heard from Brent Job in a while. And I know years ago Brent had a stroke. And I know that he takes medicine that is so rough on him that in the mornings he just has to lay down until he gets himself together and can start moving again. But his wife, Heather, said to him one time, the congregation was looking for a new preacher, and the salary had been $100,000. And Heather said, Brent, do you think Caleb would come here for $100,000? And Brent Job said, I don't think Caleb would come here for $1 million. That was one of the biggest compliments that I have heard. Brent is telling folk that I cannot be bought. God bless you. Thank you. It means a tremendous amount to me. And someone says, well, Caleb, you spent about an hour and a half saying you don't care what people think. Well, I like compliments just like anybody else does. I'm human. Sorry. I don't have it. I don't have a sectarian allegiance going on with folk. I don't have an alma mater. My dad graduated in good standing from the Memphis School of Preaching. And my dad did not give me grief when I got kicked out. And he said, man, Caleb, don't you know I had a good thing going with the Memphis School of Preaching? No, I didn't hear any of that. I just got put out. And my dad hasn't been a party man, and I don't want to be a party man. And I'm winding down. And you say, boy, this has just been the Ed Harrell Telethon. This is Volume 1, Number 1 of Christianity Magazine. And this was his segment of the magazine, Past, Present, and Perfect. And look what he says, I am a Christian. The Americans, no, we're good. The Americans demanded that they were free, masterless individuals, wrote Alexis de Tocqueville. In his classic description of the American character in 1835, they sought absolute independence and equality of status. They imagined that their whole destiny is in their own hands. They acquire the habit of always considering themselves as standing alone. It is this fierce independence of mind that has allowed New Testament Christianity to flourish in America. I am sure we are all thankful for the freedom of speech and conscience, which has been the incubator of New Testament Christianity in the modern world. It is precisely this habit of mind that led many 19th century American Christians to renounce these, whatever. Here we go to the next part. A couple words are cut out. Look what he says. As a historian, I have been repulsed by the human forms of religion, by obscure theological systems, fruitless hair-splitting and semantical debate, by ecclesiastical institutions that bear no resemblance to the Christianity of the New Testament, and by fat and flabby preachers whose selfish motives are transparent. Societies have often turned anti-religious because of such perversions. It is easy to understand why. If all there was to commend religion to us was its historic forms and its present institutions, I would opt for an enlightened secularism. If I propose to stand against war, it won't be at the behest of a political activist who appeals to a God of his own creation to support a cause of his own creation. And while I do indeed urge others to be moral, I have no interest in religious political movement that mixes the divine with the profane without discrimination to support right-wing politics. Next quote. Like Elias Smith, I thank God that I am just a Christian. Oh, it takes some courage to stand alone with our whole destiny in our own hands. It means ridding ourselves of the accumulated assumptions of the centuries, standing alone and without prejudice before the world of God. It means, as Alexander Campbell said, that we must open the New Testament as if mortal man had never seen it before. This is spiritual exhilaration and such pioneering as there must have been in viewing the continent for the first time. But it demands brave and adventuresome men and women, that kind that carved out American nation, to be Christian only, free from theological jargon and culture-bound institutions, is not only an exciting business, it is also the right way. If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. I refuse all labels and I am bored by all other systems of thought. I am a Christian. He had an article in Vanguard where he said, I will never surrender my religious independence. Freedom. It is what we all want. And somebody said, well, they're not total freedom. Well, that's the dissonance. We're all trying to figure out how much freedom. When, where, to what extent, in what scenarios. But I just don't understand why people can't respond back in the open. And I'm not just trying to start a fight. But instead of just going off somewhere and complaining, I don't know why it can't just be put back out. I'm here. I'm a child of God. I am admitting the people are my senior. And I'm engaged in the conversation. And I'm just asking, can you give me something? Now, freedom is what we want. And let me close out in typical fashion. Evangelism is what we need. Look, the discussions that we do on this broadcast that center around fellowship are a fraction to what we do with 3 nightly broadcasts and 1 2-hour-long Bible study on Tuesday morning. Give me a break. Well, I watch those guys. All they do is sling mud at the brother. Man, shut up and get out of here. We do nighttime evangelism. We do evangelism in a local community. We live local. We are engaged with the local community. People know who we are. They know what our convictions are. And I don't want it to just be like the thing where someone says, you're the brother. Well, someone's got to say something. Man. But I don't necessarily view myself that way. I just view myself as a Christian who lives in Virginia, and I'm trying to make the most out of what I can in my local community. And I write in the paper, and I go to city council meetings. But here's Ed Harrell, and he moved his family over to India, and here he is in 1976. And here he is again. This is his last trip over into India in 2019. And there's a note, like I said, John Weaver wrote the book, Explorer in Search of Zion. Some people might look at Ed and they say, well, I don't really care for what he did. It was just a bunch of in-house fighting. One of the notes about the missionaries inside of this book is Ed Harrell was supporting a missionary in the Philippines on a monthly basis, and if you put the amount that he was supporting back then into a calculator, he was sending that man about $1,000 a month. And then he was doing his own stuff. It's a well-documented book, and you ought to read it. But when you read it, pay attention to how much he's doing in the local scene. And then he has foreign missions on top of it. And then remember that he called himself a legalistic fanatic who takes a harsh stance. Here it is. I'll try to take it on the chin as best as I can. I'm 31. I'm a millennial. Is my dad a boomer? He's 64. He'll be 65 in the summertime. Yeah, my dad needs better friends. Good night. My dad should be getting so... Is it a popularity contest? No. But you start talking about, my friends. My dad's friends have been so poor to him, it is ridiculous. This is the what year is it? He has it on the inside. 1993. 1993, my dad sends a newsletter back home, Pacific Island Fishers of Men. That's my dad, my mom, my brother, my sister, and this is in April 1993. My mom is pregnant with me, and I'll be born in September. And this is the island chain that they are working. Micronesia. Where is it? I don't even know where I'm from. Somewhere in there is the Marshall Islands. There it is. Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and my dad was working that island chain in 1993. And look at what he says. Evangelizing coarse rye. Maybe I'm saying it wrong. Sometimes my dad has a different accent than I have, and I actually don't know how to say words because he said them in an odd way, and now I say them in an odd way, and I say them in an extra odd way because I'm mainly from Virginia and he's from Texas. I spoke briefly of coarse rye in the March issue of Fishers of Men. I have since been to coarse rye. Let me tell you about the trip. This was my first visit to this country. I was surprised with what I found. The people of coarse rye consider themselves highly religious. They are 95% Presbyterian in practice. The other 5% is divided into Baptist, Seventh-day Adventists, and Mormonism. When asked by the immigration officer at the airport what my purpose for being there was, I replied, I am a missionary. He immediately became harsh. They do not like what they call new religion. I spent 5 days there just to get acquainted with the customs and familiarize myself to the island so I can plan my next trip with more certainty. While there, I found the relatives of one of our brethren in Madras. We had a Bible study in their village 3 nights, and I was invited to another village about an hour away by one of the participants in the study. Next article. He says, a man who was in the study was a teacher in the Presbyterian church. He asked me to let them know when I was coming again because he wanted me to present the same lesson to the reverends and the deacons. The lesson was Jesus once, only one church. On the second day, I was called by the mayor of the village of this place that I don't know how to say. He wanted to know more purpose and intentions for being there. I was able to present the same lesson to him and his wife. He gave me his blessing to continue teaching. When the people see the message right there on the pages of the Bible, it is hard for them to reject it. And look what he says. They are shy by nature, and dishonesty is just not something they're good at. The Peachtree City Church of Christ is sending out, probably that's called Pacific Island Bible School. They're sending out Pacific Island Bible School courses to some 40 students, some of whom I was able to contact, so we have broken the ground and hope to see fruit soon. Curibus, he's going to go back to Curibus. This is called Abbey Mama. My main purpose for going to Abbey Mama was to build up the existing Christians. These newly converted men and women have a great spiritual need since no one is there to constantly see after their growth. We write them and take the Pacific Island Bible School course as well as read materials to leave with them. When I make a trip, I try to gauge their growth and begin to give them upbuilding from that point. I found that they were not coming together as they should, so I taught daily on worship, the necessity of it, the strength of it, strength from it, also lessons on the Lord's Supper. These people are brand new Christians, and it is hard for them on their own. But just like babies, when they get out of the infant stage, they will begin to increase rapidly. I spent 8 days with these brethren. We saw the wife of one of the newest brothers become a member of the church. While there, it was a very encouraging trip. Pacific Island Bible School is a great tool in the islands. I would like to give a special thanks to the Big Rock Church of Christ in Canton, Texas, for faithfully sending Bible courses to Abbey Mama. The people are receiving their courses. Also, this information against Seventh-day Adventism. I was also able to study with the principal of the Seventh-day Adventists on 2 occasions. Also an invitation to study with their science teacher awaits my next visit. Please pray for this work. And you go on to the next one. Let's see if that works. That works. Here's pictures. Christian taxi driver, spreads the gospel. That's young Johnny. First Ladies Teacher Training Day. That's my mother on the far left and the Marshallese women. They said, please come teach in our village. There's young Johnny again. 2 Souls in Maduro. He's in the middle. Course-Rye Mayor demands my presence. 2 Souls in Maduro are baptized in March. I'm being honest, as I try to always be. Y'all remember that before Carrie Sword died, Carrie Sword was upset with my dad and me. One thing that I always said about Carrie Sword, and I said I am not going to take away and ignore that Carrie Sword was a missionary for 20 years in Ukraine. And I don't know why it doesn't get more appreciation that my dad spent 7 or 8 years in the Pacific Island chain and then came back to Virginia, where the Church of Christ is hardly present, and cut out a section of highway for the cause. To build up the television broadcast as he did, to have the debates with sectarians as he did, to host all the tent meetings that he did, and then get y'all involved. And I'm talking to his friends. Y'all have done him very poorly. One final note. My mother talks about home notes. And she says this, my sister Che. My mother said, I mentioned to someone in front of Micah that Che was 11 going on 18. Later, somebody asked Micah how old he was, and he said 4 going on 12. Che is still doing well in school. Down here, Micah led a prayer somewhere not long ago at the end of Bible class. Micah said the prayer for us. During this prayer, he said, please help Che to be a good girl. It surprised everyone, and when he finished, some even laughed. Now, every prayer he says, he asks for Che to be good. Maybe because he knows he should be asking the same for himself. Here's another one, down here at the bottom. We are once again adjusting to Johnny going on his trips again, although on his last one to Kiribati, the man at the travel agency told me he had talked to Johnny and now Johnny would not be coming home until a week later. And my mom says, well, I never heard anything different from Johnny. So on his scheduled day to arrive, we went to the airport to see if he was there. The plane was already in and had been pulled to the barn. We drove past the airport looking to see if Johnny was standing out there, and he wasn't. When we turned around and headed back towards home, Che saw him coming out of the baggage claim area. He had already been out looking for us and thought we weren't coming to get him. We're all very glad to see each other. Thanks for your continued prayers. Love, Lori. Few people will ever know the feeling of being away from your family that long in a third world country and leaving the main island of a third world country, going out to an outer island and be separated from your wife and kids and your pregnant wife on top of that, and then to come home and think, why have they not picked me up from the airport? And then they go there and say, Dad is supposed to be home, and he's not. And then as you're leaving away, there he is. Very few people will know what that's like. And I'm saying that Johnny Robertson has been a participant in the conversation with everybody. And your problem is that some of y'all put out in the open, you said, here's our lines. And then he came along and he said, well, here's your line. What are you going to do about this? And y'all said, Johnny Robertson, you don't get to question us about our lines. Well, then Johnny Robertson has some lines, and Curtis Cates says, Brother Robertson, please come into my office. It's inconsistent. I'm not going for it. My dad never has. I never will. And my children will not either. You want to know what's wrong with a lot of y'all's kids and why they leave the church? Because you have not fought back against the absolutely ungodly, damnable, disgusting politics, and they are fed up with it, and they say, I can get this in the world, and they hike it. Never going to do it. I am never going to do it. I will never get myself bound up into those situations. I will die before I do that. And I'll go to heaven when I die. What did that last statement think that you're saying a lot of us won't? No, I fully expect to see you in heaven, brother. Because you're covered in the blood like I am. I'm just trying to do something with my dissonance. This was our informer for Sunday door knocking last week. Psalm 23 and avoiding sin. I am trying. I wrote that. I'm trying to do God's will. Can you give me something? 276-806-3641. I love you. That's it. We're done.